participate. The mind reading is actually amazing, and I've never figured out how he did it. Although I did twist his arm recently and got him to tell me about it. But it's pretty cool. Announcements kind of thing. So exam is in 2 weeks, is that right? A week from Monday? 2 weeks from... I guess it ends 2 weeks from today, so you're all going to take it 2 weeks from today. I have no illusions about that. Although if you take it earlier in the day, then the lines at the testing center are less long, shorter. So that means that on Monday I'm going to send out potential essay questions. So I'll do the same thing that I did last time, where I'll send out 3 questions, and I'll choose one of those 3 for the essay question on the exam. The exam length will be the same as last time, so it'll be 50 multiple choice questions, taken from the material since the last exam, so this middle unit. And then the final itself will be, I think the format of the final will be 50 multiple choice questions, again, taken from the last third of the course, and then 3 essay questions instead of 1. So you'll probably need to bring a blue book for the final. And for that, I'll send out in advance a list of probably 5 or 6 or so potential questions, and I'll choose 3 from that list for the final. So 2 out of those 3 will be more integrative kinds of cumulative kinds of questions. Any questions about administrative sorts of stuff?
When is lab 2?
2 is due a week
from Friday.
Week from Friday. So that's the one where you go to the MOA and look for pictorial cues for depth in the Wide Open Spaces exhibit, which is down in the basement of the MOA. You'll have to do it by the due date because they're taking down that exhibit the next day, I think, or that day, something like that. That's the last day that you can possibly see these paintings. And they're pretty cool paintings. A lot of Maynard Dixon, a lot of Southern Utah kinds of stuff. Any other questions? So that was actually pretty straightforward. That one, we don't have a worksheet for that one. That was just... so it's just... If you wanted to fill that out as bullet points, that would be fantastic. If you wanted to make a table and fill in a table, then that would be fine. That makes it easier for us to grade. If you want examples of the photos of the paintings, I can get you those, just so that we know what painting you're talking about. If you have any questions about that assignment, let me know. We've sort of gone over it before, but it's been a while ago. Other questions? How many of you went to the, not devotional forum yesterday? I saw you, actually. So, famous neurosurgeon from Johns Hopkins. What brain structure did he mention? He only mentioned one. The hippocampus. When in doubt, the hippocampus is always the right answer. So he talked about my favorite brain structure, the hippocampus, and he got it horribly wrong. And I feel like I need to correct this. I can't just let it go. So what did he say about the hippocampus? Right, exactly. So if you stick an electrode into the hippocampus and stimulate it, then you can get the patient to recite verbatim a novel that they read 50 years ago or something like that. Is that possible? It sounds kind of science fiction-y. Because otherwise, I mean, what's to stop students from sticking electrodes in their hippocampi and, recalling everything verbatim for the exam? Is it possible? It's more fiction than science in the science fiction thing. No, it's horribly wrong. First, we talked about attention in here, right? So you have to attend to things in order for them to be encoded into long-term memory. And does everything get attended to? No, we don't attend to everything. So we miss a large chunk of, we actually attend to a very, very small chunk of the world around us. If it's not encoded, it's not going to be stored in long-term memory. And then your hippocampus remodels itself all the time. That's what neuroplasticity is. And so your memory is not veridical, meaning that it's not like a video recorder. It's not like you can hit the play button and play back exactly what you saw 50 years ago. It just doesn't work like that. So for a neurosurgeon, That's actually pretty typical for neurosurgeons. They know where things are. They know how to cut them out. What they do, maybe not so much. All right, so otherwise it was a good talk, right? It was pretty funny and pretty entertaining. All right, so last time we left off talking about optic flow. And I wanted to show you an example of optic flow really quick. Oh, we've still got Johnny Cash going on. Sorry about that. All right, so here is an example of optic flow. So as you're driving in a car, notice that in the center of the visual scene, oh, that didn't go on nearly long enough. Replay. So in the center of the visual scene, you don't get a lot of movement, but as things sort of move out from the middle, then it moves faster. And so what does this imply? What sort of motion does this imply? What do you feel like is going on as you're looking at this? Yeah, so you've got motion parallax, where things that are closer are moving faster than things that are farther in the distance. It also implies that you're moving, right? As the observer, you're moving through the environment, and the environment is staying still, right? So if I wanted to create a driving simulator, which I'm guessing a lot of these, I don't dare click on random YouTube videos in class. So if I wanted to create a driving simulator, or if I wanted to make it look like you were driving when in fact you weren't, like they do in sitcom TV shows, where Mr. T is doing this on the steering wheel, then I just have reverse optic flow, right? So I just take this video and I reverse it so it looks like the background is receding into the distance. All right, so all of that implies motion on the part of the observer, but not on the part of the environment. So that's this last thing. So as you're moving through the environment, you see things moving. The whole image on your retina changes, but your perception is that the world is staying still and that you are moving. So we've got three situations. One where Jeremy walks past Maria. Maria keeps her eyes fixated on the window. So she's looking out the window and he just walks in front of her. The second one, Maria thinks Jeremy's kind of cute, and so she follows him through the environment with her eyes. And then the third one, Jeremy's absent, and Maria is just walking through the scene. So the way that this is sort of described, the way that we perceive, in one case we perceive Jeremy moving. So in the first two, actually, you perceive Jeremy moving, even though the information present on your retina is different in both of those cases. In the first one, the information present is that the whole scene stays the same because you keep your eyes fixated, but that Jeremy moves across there. And that's sort of the most obvious one. And the way that that's described is that there's a local disturbance in the optic array. So just one thing changes, and so you perceive that one thing as moving. So the object moves relative to the background such that it's covered and uncovered. So the background is covered and uncovered. And that's disturbing the optic array. The other situation is where you have a global optic flow. So that was the video that I just showed. This is where you're moving through the environment. Everything changes, and you don't have a local disturbance. You have a global disturbance. So you perceive the environment staying still and you moving, because that's the most parsimonious explanation, right? Most parsimonious is that the world stays fixed and doesn't all move at once in a coherent fashion. All right, so the first situation, Maria, the observer, is still, so there's no global change. Jeremy walks across the visual scene, and so it produces a local disturbance in the optic array. And so what's your perception in this case? Jeremy's moving, right? So there's a single object moving, the whole world stays still. Same sort of thing here. Although Maria moves her eyes to follow Jeremy, producing a global optic flow, except for the case where Jeremy is. So the image of Jeremy stays relatively constant in the center of the retina, and the perception is that Jeremy is moving, which produces a local disturbance in the optic array. So he's covering and uncovering things in the background. So notice that here he's in front of the window, he's in front of a different part of the window, here he's moved past the window. So it's still creating a local disturbance, and so your perception is of Jeremy moving and the whole rest of the world staying the same. If, however, you have a global disturbance, then you know that you're moving. And either you can move your eyes, or you can move your body. You can get up and walk through the array, and the effect is going to be the same. That you have a global change and there's no local disturbance. Okay. So behaviorally, we can ask, what do you perceive? And show these three different situations, and then just ask people what they perceive, and they'll report things. Or another way to get at this is through looking at the physiology. So looking at neurons that are sensitive to motion. And it turns out that it's pretty complicated. It's more complicated than you might think. So the idea is that, well, if I know that I'm moving my eyes, then that information is present in my brain, right? Because that signal originates in my brain. And so I can take that into account and compensate for my eye movement when the optic array changes. Similarly, you can take vestibular information. You can feel that your body is moving in space. And so if your vestibular information conflicts with the visual information, then that's usually a good indication that something is wrong, right? So what's the most typical case when your vestibular information conflicts with your visual information? Say it louder.
You just slip on ice.
Okay, so you slip on ice. But there you're going to have the same sort of, you're not going to have a conflict, because as you're falling, the visual information is going to change and your vestibular information is going to agree with that.
When you're dizzy?
Yeah, when you're dizzy. So what often makes you dizzy?
Spinning.
So, okay, spinning. So your vestibular information. So your vestibular information is just your sense of motion, right? So it has to do with your inner ear. We'll talk a little bit about this a bit later on. So it's your sense of balance and things like that, right? So if you continue to spin, even when you stop spinning, the information present in your inner ear indicates that you're still spinning. So the vestibular information conflicts with the local visual information, and you feel sick.
Is that why your eyes keep tracking even when you're stationary after you stop spinning?
Right, because you want to continue to make that connection, right? You want to compensate for this vestibular information where you feel like you should be tracking with your eyes, but you don't necessarily need to. Yeah?
Isn't this also like motion sickness?
Yes.
You're in a car or on a boat.
Right, exactly. So if you're reading in the car, for example, then the visual information is, scanning back and forth on the page. The vestibular information is that you're moving forward. And so there's a conflict between what you're getting from your eyes and what you're getting from your vestibular information, or your vestibular system. And so, yeah, so again, you feel sick. Why do you feel sick in these cases? Why does it make you nauseous?
Conflicting inputs. Your body doesn't know what to do.
So throw up is the best response to that?
Your body's amazing.
Is it at all adaptive to throw up in that situation? What does throwing up do? Gets rid of poisons, right? So your I'm not going to go. I can't remember the name of the brain structure. Shoot. Okay, so there's a
Hippocampus.
area of this. Yes. What does it do?
It's the little part in your blood-brain barrier that things can pass through, so it detects the poison connection.
Right, exactly. And so if you activate this brain region, area postrema, is that right? That all I know is the description, right? That it easily allows toxins in your blood to pass into your brain and sort of detects toxins in your blood. If you activate this, then you feel nauseous, basically. And feeling nauseous allows you to expunge these toxins from your system, i.e. vomit them. So feeling it also makes you feel dizzy, right? So if you're feeling dizzy, then that's a good indication that you have toxins on board, and you need to get rid of these toxins. And so your body interprets these dizzy feelings, these conflicts between one sensory system and the other as, hold on, something's not right, it's probably a toxin, and so it's adaptive to throw up in those situations.
Does this structure become more sensitive over time? Because I feel like when I went to Disneyland, when I was a little kid, the teacups were the most amazing things in the world, and now I have issues with them.
I don't know that it does become more sensitive over time. I mean, your strategy for dealing with these things is going to be different. And different physiological changes are going to happen that are going to cause this to be more sensitive or not. So with pregnancy, for example, you're going to be a lot more sensitive because you want to expunge toxins much more readily. You want to have a lower threshold to protect the fetus. And so, yes, there are physiological changes. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do, in fact, change over time. And you can adopt different strategies for these things as well. So I know that I can't read in the car, and so I'll adopt a strategy of looking straight out the window so that the visual information coincides with the vestibular information. Tell us.
With the car example, so after isn't it mostly like on start stops and turning? Because if you're cruising down the 15, then your vestibular information is going to when you start, yeah, it's going to tell you that you're moving forward, but then with constant motion, you're not accelerating. The vestibular information is going to stop. And so
right, so the vestibular information just tells you that you're constantly in motion, right? So you're going to know that the car is moving. But if you're reading in the car, so with starts and stops, yes, that's huge vestibular information. But with constant motion, you don't get a lot of vestibular feedback. But if you're reading in the car, then the constant feedback that you're getting is going to conflict with this moving back and forth. And so that may be enough to set you off. You're from California.
Yeah.
The 15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
San Diego.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. The 15 goes to San Diego.
Yep.
Yeah.
How does the conflict of visual and vestibular input transfer into the toxins in the blood?
I don't know. That's actually conjecture on my part. So it makes sense that if you have conflicting information coming from these two things, so if you think about the EEA, so the era of evolutionary adaptivity, what is going to cause vestibular information to conflict with visual information? Well, probably one of these things is not working properly. And so if one of these things is not working properly, what's the most likely cause for that? Toxins. Maybe. Or brain damage, or other bad things, or spinning too much. But how much did our ancestors spin around in circles? I don't know. So it's a bit of conjecture on my part. And even for evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology, it's sort of a conjecture, but it sort of makes sense, right? But that's actually not where I wanted to go with this. Let's talk about stuff that we do have data for. So corollary discharge theory. So the idea is that if you move your eyes, you've got a motor signal coming from your motor cortex to tell your eye muscles to move, right? And the idea is that you've also got another signal generated in the motor cortex that goes to the visual system. It sort of has a parallel loop to tell the visual system, hey, we're moving the eyes, so expect the optic array to change. We're not actually moving in the environment, it's just your eyes, don't worry about it. So you've also got, in the visual system, you've got this image movement signal. So you can compare, what do I expect from the motion, from the motor signal, so you can compare that signal with what you're actually getting from the eyes and see if they conflict or not. So you can move your eyes, and as you're moving your eyes, you can detect motion. And the reason that you can detect that motion is there's a conflict between the motor signal and the bottom-up signal coming from your eyes. So this is sort of how the system is laid out. You've got the motor signal coming from motor cortex going to your eyes, to your eye muscles to say move. You've got the corollary discharge signal coming into the visual system, and they converge, and it converges with the image movement signal at a comparator. So you've got cells that are comparing what you expect from the motor signals with what you're actually getting from your eyes. And then if there's any difference between these two things, difference between what you expect and what you actually get, then you perceive movement. Does that make sense? All right, so this is known as the corollary discharge theory. So it makes some predictions. So the movement is based on a summation of the corollary discharge signal as well as the image movement signal. And movement is not perceived when these two things don't conflict, when they're in sync with one another. So you move your eyes, you get a change in the optic array, and if they're the same, if it's what you're expecting, you don't perceive motion. If there is a difference, however, you do perceive motion. So if you get a corollary discharge signal but no change in the visual array, then you're going to get a signal from the comparator that says, hey, there's movement going on. If you get a change in the visual array but no corollary discharge signal, then again, you're going to perceive motion. So what's this case where you get a signal from the motor system but no change in the visual array? How is that possible? Yeah, if you're tracking something. So if the scene moves and you move your eyes to follow it, then you're not going to get a change in the visual array, but you are going to get this corollary discharge signal, so you're going to see motion. You're going to perceive motion. Here, you're not tracking something. Your eyes are stationary because there's no motor signal going through, and so you perceive motion. You see it?
Is that the first array? Is that when Jeremy walked and you tracked him? Because the background was changing still.
Yeah, so this is going to be local to that part of the visual scene. So it's not the entire visual scene. You need lots of comparators because you can perceive motion in lots of different places. So yeah, so this is for this. Think of it as a receptive field. So for this receptive field, are we going to perceive motion here or not? Yeah. Yeah, so this is not for the whole scene, obviously, because you can perceive different kinds of motion in different parts of the scene. And then here, where you move your eyes and the image changes, you're not going to perceive motion because these two basically cancel each other out. They inhibit one another. So, what other predictions does this theory make? So what if you do things like immobilize the eyes? So if I were to anesthetize your eye muscles, what's going to happen?
Well, the corollary discharge signal should still be sent, shouldn't it?
Right, so you're going to get a motor signal coming from the brain.
But you're not actually changing your eye movement, so it depends on what situation you have, if you have something moving or not.
All right, so let's assume that the world is stationary. You're just in a room, nothing's moving. But I've anesthetized your eye muscles, so you get the motor signal coming from the brain.
And you get no image signal.
Right.
And
So
it should be that.
that's this situation, right? So you get the corollary discharge, no change in the image because you can't actually move your eyes. I've immobilized them. And so what are you going to perceive? The world is spinning around you, right? So this is going to be very disorienting because you're trying to move your eyes are not moving, but your brain is expecting motion. And so the world is going to move in the opposite, your perception is going to be the world is moving in the opposite direction from where you've tried to move your eyes. And so the whole room is going to spin and it's going to be very disconcerting. What about if you, I've got all these things sketched out here. So what about if you, if I shine a light at your eye, so a bright light from a flashlight, and then I turn off all the lights, and you move your eyes. So with that after image, what happens with that? You get the same sort of thing when you close your eyes and then move your eyes. Although not quite as well.
The shining light spot on your eye will move with your pupil. So, like, if you shine it right here, when I look that way, the light will move with it.
Right, yeah, so the after image will move. So you've got the corollary discharge coming through, but no change in the visual signal. And so what do you perceive happens to that after image? It's moving, yeah. So you get the corollary discharge signal, but no change in the optic array, and so you perceive motion. Does that make sense? No?
It might be more related to what we just talked about. But what's happening like when you're sitting in a parked car and another car like backs out next to you and then you like slam on the brakes even though your car's not moving? Like you feel, I don't know, for some reason seeing the other car go backwards.
Motion, right?
Yeah, so that's induced motion. So that's it's kind of similar to what we talked about with the motion illusion, where you see motion go one direction for long enough, then when you stop, your perception is that it's moving in the opposite direction. It's the same sort of thing. So you induce this perception of motion. It's like when you go to Universal theaters, Universal Studios, and they've got that big tunnel where you're on the tram and you go through, and the big tunnel rotates, or the fun house where the tunnel rotates, and you've got to go through that. So you feel like you need to compensate for that, right? You've got to lean the opposite direction because the whole world is turning. So it's just an induced motion illusion. So it's probably different than this. Well, it might. Well, you perceive motion because you get the image signal that's changing relative to your motor signal. For this one, so if I bleach out part of your receptors by shining a flashlight in your eyes, then you're going to have an after image, right? So you're going to have the sort of green phosphorescent things. And then if I turn off all the lights, when you move your eyes, that after image is going to move with your eyes. And so you're getting the corollary discharge. So it's the same situation as before. So you get the corollary discharge signal, but you don't get any change in the optic signal. And so you perceive these after images as sort of moving around. Same thing if we were to anesthetize your eye. If the eye muscles are paralyzed, the eye remains stationary when the observer tries to move the eye. Therefore, you get the corollary discharge, but no change in the optic signal, in the optic array. What if you push on your eyeball? You do this. You're not actually touching my eye. You can push on your eyelid. So you close one eye, you push this one. You perceive motion, right? The scene sort of moves around. It doesn't stay still. It sort of moves around. And you know it's because you're pushing on your own eyeball. If somebody else pushed on your eyeball, ooh, that'd be even worse. But you would again perceive motion. Why? Are you getting a corollary discharge signal? No. But are you getting a change in the optic array? Yes. So anytime there's a conflict, you perceive motion. And then here, this is probably the most normal situation, the most probable situation, where you have something move, your eyes move, but the image of the object does not move because you're tracking it, and so therefore you do perceive motion, right? Because you've got the corollary discharge signal, but the image stays in the same place, and so you perceive that image as moving. Does that all make sense? So all of this is predicted by the corollary discharge signal. And it turns out that there are brain structures that do support this. So it's not just a theory. There are data that support this. So damage to the medial superior temporal area in humans leads to the perception of movement, a stationary environment when you move your eyes. So this is the most likely location of the comparator. We also see that there are real motion neurons found in monkeys that respond only when a stimulus moves and do not respond when the eyes move. So even though, so remember V1 neurons respond to both self and other motion. So if you pass a line through their receptive field, then they fire, right? And it doesn't matter if the monkey is moving its eyes or if the object is moving. Anytime something moves in these complex receptive fields, then this neuron fires. These other neurons that are sort of higher up in probably MT, for example, is that where they are? Yeah, I think they're in MT, middle temporal area. They fire only when objects are actually moving in the environment, not when the monkey moves its eyes. So these are receiving information from this comparator. They're able to sort of compensate for the fact that the monkey is moving its eyes. So these are real motion neurons. They fire when the bar moves from left to right across the neuron's receptive field, but not when the monkey passes the receptive field across a stationary bar of the same orientation. So with real motion, when the stimulus actually moves, you get firing of these receptive fields. So these lines, this rasterogram indicates firing rates, but you get no change in firing rate as the eyes themselves move. So how does the monkey know these things? Oh, what's this supposed to be? Oh, this is just to show you where these things are. So motion processing, parietal cortex. So parietal cortex is involved in motion sensitivity. Middle temporal, so area MT or V5 in humans, is right about here. And then V3 is back there. So remember, with V1 neurons, they've got receptive fields. They're not really round. They're sort of rectangular. But the idea is that these receptive fields respond to lines of a certain orientation that are moving in a certain direction, right? So, and that's really all the information that they have is there something moving in their receptive field or not? But this gives rise to what's known as the aperture problem. The problem is that if you imagine that say you're looking through a knot hole in a fence, and you see something move past that knot hole, do you know if it's something moving up this direction or something that's moving just straight across from that little information that you have? You don't know, right? So the visual information would be the same in both cases. So the problem is that the observation of a small portion of a larger stimulus leads to misleading or incomplete information. So if we have something like this, so if this is our aperture, if this is our receptive field, and we pass something like that across it, then the stimulus is going to look exactly the same as if we did something like this across it. Except I've done a bad job with the animation and I've got an end in there. So that's one situation, and that's the other situation. So one of those was moving from the bottom left to the top right. One of those was moving directly across. Can you tell which one was which? No.
Well, it sounds like our problem with the car backing up earlier. Your attention or your visual processing is focused on that car moving, and so your body and your brain perceive that everything is moving because it's limited to just that focus.
Right. If all you've got is that one bit of information and you don't have everything else around it, if you don't have the rest of the context, then yes, you would assume, hey, wait a minute, I'm moving. I need to hit the brakes or something like that. Yeah. Yeah. So this is basically another illustration of the same thing. So you could have stripes like this moving in that direction or diagonal stripes moving straight up, and you would not be able to tell the difference. So this same sort of thing. That if you were to just focus on a little bit of this information here, so if we block out everything else and just look at this, it looks like there are diagonal stripes that are moving up this bar. But in fact, that's not the case, right? So there are diagonal stripes that are rotating around, and so you get the illusion of things moving up the bar. So how does our visual system solve this problem? How do we go from V1 neurons being able to see only a small part of the visual scene and only being able to see motion in one small area to being able to perceive things that are moving coherently?
Uses lots of inputs.
Right, yeah, so massive parallel computing. So this is the idea that if you've got this V1 neuron that has this receptive field and it sees this and then this, well, there are two possibilities, right? So it could be that it's just moving straight down, or it could be that A has moved to spot C instead of to spot B. So does that make sense? So the same thing so this same change could be explained by two possible scenarios, actually multiple possible scenarios. It could move the other direction as well. So how do you figure it out? Well, fortunately, we have more than just V1, right? So you've got V1 plus things that V1 projects to. And you've got loads of units in V1. So what you can do is have a global motion detector, say in area MT, for example, that takes all of these inputs from V1, actually from a layer right above V1. So V1 is detecting, okay, is there motion in my visual field, in my receptive field? Yes. Is there motion in my receptive field? Yes. Motion here? Yes. And you take all of these things and you combine all of their information together in order to figure out what is the global amount of activity, what is the global bit of motion that's going on. So the solution to the aperture problem is that you have lots and lots of inputs and you put them all together, basically. So in addition to just these motion selective cells, you've also got cells in V1 that are responsive to lines that end, so the ends of lines, or to angles in lines. So you're able to put the ends of lines together and figure out, okay, so this line ends here and here, and the ends move up in this direction. So you can figure out the overall activity, the overall motion of the stimulus. So this is all probably put together in area MT, which we know is sensitive to global motion. So here's sort of a picture of where MT is in the monkey. So you've got V1 information that goes both to the ventral stream and to the dorsal stream, and MT is in the dorsal stream. So it's this middle temporal area here. Inferior temporal is down here. So inferior temporal, we've talked about earlier, is responsive to objects. So if you damage IT, then you have object agnosia. If you damage MT, you end up with motion agnosia. So an inability to perceive motion. This is the sort of strobe light condition that we talked about last time. So how sensitive are MT neurons to motion? And this is actually some really interesting research. So the idea is that you show these monkeys random dots, so like static on the TV. You show them these randomly moving dots, and the question is, how coherent does the motion have to be in order for the monkey to perceive movement? So if you've ever stared at the static on the TV, do you ever eventually start to see pictures coming through with this? Am I the only one? So like when I was a kid, I was very excited about Saturday morning cartoons, so I got up at, I don't know how early, very, very early, before cartoons were actually even on, and it was just static. And I would sit one time. I remember sitting and watching and thinking, okay, I can see Scooby-Doo in there, and sort of convincing myself that I do actually see motion in this, and that the motion is coherent. So how coherent do these random dots have to be in order for the monkey to perceive motion, in order for these MT neurons to actually respond? So you can vary experimentally the coherence of the random dot patterns, and monkeys are taught to judge the direction of dot movement. So if the dots all move toward the top of the display, the monkey presses a button and gets a juice reward or something like that. So the monkeys can discriminate between moving up and moving down, or moving side to side, things like that. So the direction of motion they can respond to, and you can also measure from the activity in MT neurons to see how robust is their responding. So the results show that as the coherence of the dot movement increase, so does the firing rate of MT neurons and the judgment of movement accuracy. So if you have zero correlation, if they're just randomly moving, then MT neurons fire fairly weakly, and the monkeys are at chance performance. Basically, they're never going to get rewarded for these things because there's not really any movement. If you get half of the dots moving coherently, then the monkeys are actually really good at judging this motion. The other dots, the other half, are all moving in random directions. If you have 100% coherence, then that's really easy, right? Everything's moving in the same direction. And you get robust firing for in MT neurons for this. You get pretty good firing for this. You get no firing for this because the MT neurons are direction sensitive, and so they're basically just canceling each other out in that case. So how coherent do you think the motion has to be? What percentage do you think you have to have in order for the monkeys to accurately respond to this task? 20, 10? It's lower, actually. Even as low as 1 to 2%. Monkeys with MT lesions can't respond until it actually does hit 20%. I should come up with videos of these things so I can show you just how easy it is to do this detection. So even with as little coherence as 1 to 2%, I bet you guys could do it. 20% would be a piece of cake. 50% it would be obvious. And 100% you just laugh at me. What if you do the opposite experiment? What if you stimulate MT? Can you induce motion perception by activating this motion-sensitive region in the brain? Short answer is yes, you can. So what you do is you ask the monkey to discriminate between directions, 2 different movement directions. And if you stimulate certain regions of MT, the monkey's perception of the motion will change, actually. So with no stimulation, the perception is veridical. If you stimulate MT, then the monkeys indicate that their perception is a different direction. So they'll respond differently if you're stimulating MT. So you can induce this perception through stimulation of this brain region. All right, so how good are you at detecting motion? What's that? Ballerina spinning.
Jellyfish.
Looks like a jellyfish. Okay, so it looks sort of biological, right? What if we flip it around? So exact same stimulus, but in the right configuration, you can see it and you can tell exactly what it is. Is that a man or a woman?
Are you serious?
Yeah. Male or female?
Male.
It's a guy.
Extra.
How? You know that.
We're good. It's the hips. So actually, this is sort of in between male and female. If we were to take these 2 hip dots and move them a little bit closer together, then it would be obvious that it's male. If we moved them a little bit farther apart, then it would be obvious that it's female. This is a little bit ambiguous here. But you can get people to accurately discriminate just based on things like moving these 2 dots further apart, whether it's a man or a woman. But in this case, it's obvious what it is. But if I take it and I flip it upside down, now that you know what it is, and we switch it back, you can kind of see that, but it really goes away. The effect really goes away. So we are really, really good at detecting biological motion, things that are biologically salient to us. So neurological studies show that biological motion is processed in the superior temporal sulcus. Biological motion is the movement of people or other living things. So where it looked sort of like a jellyfish, it was obvious that it was biological, right? But we weren't able to sort of accurately identify what exactly it was. So you can isolate the motion with these point light stimuli. So like these point light walkers like this, people are really good at identifying them. And you can take that sort of information and apply it in the real world. So you can take a form of structure from motion and get things like Gollum from the Lord of the Rings. This is actually what they're doing when they're animating Gollum, is they have Andy Serkis running around in this little suit, and they're recording these points on his joints and things like that to make Gollum look more lifelike and more realistic.
That's how they do it for the sports video games too.
Oh yeah? Okay, so they have different sports figures swinging a bat or swinging a golf club or something like that?
Madden and stuff.
Uh-huh. Okay, and they just capture that motion, so it's biologically salient. Why do you think you have to do that sort of stuff? If you want to make it look real, why do you have to capture real people doing this? Why can't just animators come up with this?
Well, we make a lot of fine movements that are pretty unique to individuals too. Like they even have dots on his hands and his fingers to see what he's doing. So I don't think you can capture that unless it's a real person doing it.
Right, and if you get it just slightly wrong, what happens? We notice. We totally notice, and we're able to distinguish between a man and a woman with these point light walkers. We could tell if animators were just making up Gollum, it would just look off, right? It just looks slightly wrong.
That's what I was going to say, is that we notice these small We may not know what's wrong, but we know something's wrong.
Right. Yeah. So, and the whole configuration is actually very, very important. So if you flip the whole thing upside down, you don't see it, but if you flip it right side up, then you do see it. Do we have enough time for this video? I'm going to say no, we don't have enough time for this video. I'm going to hold it over to the next time. So be thinking of instances where people have gotten this horribly wrong. I'm going to show you a couple of examples next time of how good you are at detecting biological motion. They, yes, are going to be some pretty bad movies.
Like Legos jumps off the